The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Philip Duffield, and I am a pedagogical consultant at itslearning. Welcome to today's webinar. Welcome to all of you from around the world. Good morning. These are certainly unprecedented times, so I wanted to thank you all for taking the opportunity to join us on today's webinar about communication in itslearning with a focus on distance education. On behalf of the team here at itslearning, we wish you and your families and your educational communities well, and we hope that everyone is taking care of themselves. So this webinar is for users who are new to itslearning, who want to learn about the ways that different communication tools can support students and teachers in the transition to distance education. So thank you for joining us, and let's have a look at today's agenda. So today's agenda, we're going to look through the typical challenges that students and teachers face in the transition to distance education. And then I'm going to show you a variety of communication tools within itslearning and discuss some ways from my experience and from the communications that I have with students and teachers that they can use these tools in itslearning to overcome some of the challenges mentioned in the first section. Finally, I'll wrap up with some resources that we've been creating. These are free resources, webinars like this, and documentation that we've been placing on our website, and give you some links and contact details where you can find out more information. I do want to point out that this webinar tool has a chat or a questions functionality. So please go ahead there while you are listening to the webinar. If you see any questions that you have, we are going to save a moment at the end of the webinar to get any questions. So please do type your questions in there and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, let's have a look at some of the challenges that students and teachers are facing when they are working with distant education. Firstly, students didn't choose to study at distance, and in some cases, they actually chose to study at a physical location on your campus. So it's natural for both teachers and students to feel isolated and alienated during this time. I'm sure many of you teachers have spent a long, significant investment in making your blended and face-to-face modules. And let's not kid ourselves, switching to fully distance education is difficult and requires a rewrite. So that's challenging. You're doing that alone at home, and students feel the same way. The second challenge that I see is a lack of feedback and contact with participants. And from my experience, the most significant difficulty about this is actually evaluating participants. Because when we're outside of the physical classroom, it's much harder to watch the knowledge acquisition process or watch students and groups working together and see those interactions which indicate student progress and achievement of learning objectives. It's much harder to see the learning taking place. So I hope to provide some tools on how we can alleviate some of those challenges for you. Thirdly, or in the third place, I think it's difficult to engage with learners. Activities that worked really well in the physical classroom don't always translate well into the virtual classroom. In my first webinar on this series, I made the recommendation, do not try to replace your physical class hours with video conference hours. You'll just burn yourself out, and it'll be difficult for the students as well. So it comes down to the tools available, communication barriers. It's just difficult to engage with learners. And finally, like I said, live interaction is cognitively taxing. So our brains use more energy and cognitive load to work over audio and video conference solutions than we do in face-to-face real life. And it's going to be taxing on yourself as well as your students. So we're going to need to find ways to shift what we would have done in the physical classroom or the physical lecture theater into the virtual classroom. And let's get looking into some of those tools and features available. So the tools that I'm going to go through are these first four: course announcements, the messaging system, and live chat-like functionality that itslearning has, which is for asynchronous and both synchronous communications. Look at discussion forums and 360 reports. Of course, everything in education is about communication. So I also wanted to point out e-portfolio and blog functionality, course plans, and feedback and activities. We did do a webinar on assignments where you can see some of those feedback processes. We're not going to mention this bottom point today, but do keep these in mind when you're thinking about what tools do I have available today to shift my physical work through to the virtual classroom. And I think e-portfolio and blogs is a great example of ways that you can ask students to reflect and demonstrate their learning and present something to their peers and teachers. But unfortunately, we're not going to cover that today. So having a look at the interface of itslearning, I should point out today's webinar, I'm going to use screenshots. The other webinars, we used a lot of videos and live demo in the platform. Today, we will focus on screenshots because we're going to be jumping around the platform, so it'll be easier to follow with screenshots. Students ask these types of questions all the time, but especially during distance education. And I want to point out that itslearning already aggregates this information for you. So students want to know, what tasks do I need to do, in what order? They're trying to plan ahead, they're trying to plan their schedule in these busy times. What results and feedback did I get? Where do I need to be? Where are the Microsoft Teams or the Zoom video conference links? What new content is available? So on the left-hand side, itslearning aggregates the information from student courses, their recent updates and new content in their courses. So students are used to this way of working because it's the way Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn have socialized students to understand and consume information. And on the right, we have the task list. And as long as when you're creating an activity that you set a due date for a task, and these can be either summative or formative tasks, but students can navigate through this task list. They can plan out their study time over the next coming weeks, and they can filter the task list and see what is expected of them at what times. And below that, we have a glimpse of the next couple of days of the student's calendar. So this example shows a physical classroom, but in my video conference in the first webinar in this series, I showed how easy it was for a teacher to create a Zoom and now Microsoft Teams link, put it in a calendar event, so students have all of their video conference links directly in the calendar across all of the courses they're participating in. So if all of the teachers at your organization do that, they use the calendar to share the video conference links, then it's going to be super easy for students. They're not going to be looking for links in email and Skype groups and Teams groups for their various courses, because itslearning will aggregate all of this in the same spot for you. So let's have a look at some of the specific tools that can be used. The first one that I want to get into is the course announcement. And I mentioned the challenge in engaging students being more difficult in kind of getting their excitement about a topic. So, but just by taking a URL and posting it into an announcement, teachers can really easily get students excited about a new topic. They can post new links and new content that's available. And we've even enhanced this functionality where teachers can allow students to make these types of announcements to the group. And you can see that with commenting, and students sharing resources and posting their own information. This is a really easy way to build activity and engagement in the virtual classroom. And as a handy hint there, in the green box, you see the embed icon. Anywhere you can create content, whether you're a student or teacher in itslearning, you can really easily do the same trick. You just grab the URL, in this case, a YouTube video link, paste it into that embed tool, and it'll embed really nicely in the content that you as a student or teacher are making. So in this example of the course announcement, I'm highlighting a discussion forum. And this is really good if maybe you're live during a video conference, you want to push out a survey link or a practice test, or in this case, a discussion forum. You want to push this out to students, or as soon as you finish up that video conference, you want to put this right in front of them, the next step. This is a really handy way to do that. Because I mentioned you're not going to be able to replace all of your face-to-face events. So one thing that I spoke with a teacher that they're doing is they're shutting down their 2-hour class time. They're doing half an hour on video conference, and then the students, they go away, they work in discussion forums, they work in portfolios, they do small group activities, and then they meet up later in the day or for the next lesson to continue. So using the announcement, a really good way to put information directly in front of the student. There's some advanced functionality like being able to schedule these or turn off conversation or comments abilities within the announcement tool. So have a look under that options tab. You can see it's super helpful if you want to make an announcement to the group but not start a group conversation. It might be the type of thing that you're not looking for feedback on, so you simply just turn off the commenting feature there. Let's have a look at messaging system. Now, this is a live chat style messaging tool. It's great for synchronous and asynchronous communications. And I mentioned a challenge that both teachers and students face is alienation and isolation during distance education. So one-to-one or one-to-few feedback can be quite difficult. And this tool allows teachers to easily, or students even, to easily reach out to a small group or individuals and provide feedback. So a really good way of, quite quickly reaching out to students and avoiding long email chains or avoiding long individual video conferences. Of course, sometimes a phone call can solve things much faster, but on the other hand, sometimes a quick instant message like this can check in with the student, let them know, personalize it a little bit, give some feedback. I do want to point out there that there is the feature to send the message individually to each student. This means that it looks like to that student that they're receiving this as a one-to-one message, and any response that they give is directly back to the user who sent the message. On the other hand, you might want to start a group conversation for small group live chat while working in a collaborative Microsoft document, for example. So different use cases for different scenarios, but I think do consider using this tool for your feedback and for the little personalization that you would normally give in the classroom that you can't give during. The message system also allows quick communication to the whole course. You can see here, instead of typing a student's name, I typed in the name of my course, Marketing Essentials. And I'm just reminding students about some of the rules that we've set with the Zoom video conference, that they can find the links within their calendar, and that your microphones are muted, but you can raise your hand. And just reminding them of some of those rules that we are doing for the video conferences. So messages, really great way to make sure that students saw this. It's all visible on their mobile phone. If the students have enabled it, they get a notification. So it's really student friendly and modern. The message tool can also be used to send feedback to small groups about their progress. Course groups in itslearning can be used for heaps of reasons. Typically, they're used to subdivide a class for projects or communication or personalization of material and activities. But in this example, the teacher is using the course group to message out to a specific group of students. So they might be monitoring coursework. Of course, there's some activity tools that can also use this, but again, sometimes the messaging is quite personal. It's a little bit less formal, and depending on the relationship that you have with the students, could be a great way to go to use this sort of chat style, light messaging type of solution. I mentioned earlier that we need to find opportunities to engage with students that we outside the physical classroom. And one of the biggest challenges is the inability to watch the learning happen that you can see in a physical classroom. So discussion forums and blogs are a great way to move what you used to do in face-to-face or small group sessions into the virtual classroom, because in discussion forums and blogs, teachers can actually monitor the critical analysis and the higher order thinking skills as they're happening, especially if you establish a culture where students, are forthright and share information and share their thoughts. So discussion forum, a great way to get students to, for instance, study a concept and then share their opinions in relation to the theory of the course. And you can monitor the activity and achievement here as well, seeing reports on student engagement with the discussion forum, and a great tool for use in distant education. One thing that even advanced users of itslearning sometimes miss out on is within the 360 reports, it's super easy to reach out to a student based on their activity. That is the amount of time they're spending in the course, the amount of time they're logged into the system. You can also look at progress, how far through the modules and the content the student is. But at this stage, I'm looking at the activity of John. I can look at the activity of all of my students across the last 7 days, which is a great tool for teachers to be able to see who's logging in, who's engaging with the course content, and potentially do some remedial action with those students who maybe haven't logged in 4 days. Maybe you need to reach out to them, do a phone call, try more specifically with individual students. So do take a look at 360 reports, the activity reports. I've highlighted the little paper airplane here to send a message to an individual student, but this can really, it's putting your finger on the pulse of how well students are engaging in your virtual classroom. So I highly recommend this. We've had really good feedback about these features in the move to distant education. Finally, I wanted to end up with some tips. I think it's really important that we set expectations for students about how we're going to communicate. Ideally, an entire department or institute will set some guidelines for how teachers communicate with students. For instance, that professors should post calendar events and use that to post the links for the virtual conferences. But it's really important, even if you're just a teacher on your own and your organization hasn't made these sort of guidelines, it's important for you to communicate this with students, because students have a lot of questions. How can I reach out to my teachers? And in a face-to-face university setting, students are often quite more willing to stop the teacher in the hall or after class, but maybe not so willing to reach out in a virtual classroom. Remember that this distant learning is new to your students as well, not only to us as educators. So setting some guidelines about the most common things of, where do students go for information, when are their deadlines, where do they find those deadlines, allowing them to plan their schedule over the coming weeks is going to be super helpful and reduce that anxiety or feeling of alienation that I mentioned earlier. Okay, as I say, itslearning is trying to produce some of these short, powerful webinars about the move to distant education. This is the series that we've run over the past 8 or so days. The first we began with Zoom video conference integration. We've recently added Microsoft Teams integration, so please check that out or reach out to us if you need some information there. We ran a couple of webinars on planning courses and creating assignments. These videos should all be available through this link that I've got down here, and we are going to send an email with you. So if you've missed this webinar and you want to watch a recording of it, these are available free of charge to you and your organization to use as you see fit. We've had some good feedback and good engagement with them, so we hope that you have found these useful, and please feel free to send any feedback that you have about this webinar series. Finally, learning more. If we've had really good interest from our existing user base for this webinar. If you're already a user of itslearning and you need assistance or you want more resources or you need to get in contact, because we're a global company, please start with your key account manager to discuss your needs, and they will point you in the right direction and support you the best way that they can. So the key contact at your university should reach out to the key account manager and get interest or provide feedback. If you are just looking around and interested in perhaps what you've seen today, we do have a contact us form. If you're not yet a customer of itslearning, this will point you into the right global office. We have global offices all around the world, so it's important that we put you into the right office so you can get the best help that you need. And like I say, do keep looking into this third bullet point here, this link of resources that we've made available, because we are producing content, guides, articles, really trying to support the move to distant education and like I said, bringing in new functionality very quickly, like the Microsoft Teams meeting integration. All right, I hope some people have asked questions. I'm just going to open up the questions pane. Let's have a look here. So when I use course announcements, I don't have any of the editing tools that Philip showed. Is it something that's about to be launched? Okay, so that's a good question. Let's go back to that slide on the course announcements. One thing that I want to say about messages and announcements and editing tools is that we have forced them to be accessible. We have not allowed teachers to create unaccessible content in bulletins and messaging. And the reason for that is because we do not want communication to be inaccessible to students. We know that students are using Apple Watches and millions of different types of mobile phones and tablets, and we even have users logging in with their Xbox. So one thing that we have removed from the announcement functionality is the ability to put yellow text on a pink background. So this image here, the way that we've embedded the video is we've grabbed the link here and we've just pasted it into the make announcement functionality. This sidebar image on the left, I cheated a little bit. This is actually what you see when you're editing other content like a note or a page or a plan. And this is how you can do the same embedding of content when you're embedding in elsewhere in itslearning. So the important thing that you need to know is that course announcements and message functionality, those are for quick, short messages. We've removed the need for bold and color because we want the communication to be in the message rather than be muddled up by a lot of different, inaccessibility. After all, we believe that you all are teachers and educators and not sort of designers. So we've made those tools super easy to use. Okay, there's another really good question. Can I make a file where students can turn in their assignments? They are sending through the chat, but it gets messy. Absolutely, that's a great question. So the question is about that a teacher wants to ask students to submit digital work. They want students to send an essay or a video that they've made, or maybe an audio clip that they've recorded. I would highly recommend to use the assignment tool for that. It's got some really good feedback opportunities. It's got peer reviews, so you can get students to assess each other and reduce some of your own workload. Take a look of that link that I shared earlier. We did a full webinar on assignments, another sort of 25-minute, power webinar on creating assignments. That's the best way to get students to submit their work in the digital learning platform. And if students send it via the message, write back to them and say, hey, please, here's the assignment. This is where you need to submit your work. That's the purpose of that one. Okay, we have another, maybe a piece of feedback. It would be good to be able to put bold or italics in the announcements. I don't think that many teachers would use inaccessible or yellow fonts on a pink background. Sure, I understand the feedback. I think with announcements and messages, we have removed bold and italics because we need to make sure that no matter the device that the student is using, no matter the screen readers or the tools that the student is using, if they're studying with educational support for disability tools, we need to make sure that that communication does not get mixed up in some inaccessible device or software. So I appreciate the feedback. Thanks for putting it in. I hope that my explanation about why we've made that decision in those two tools is helpful. We've had another question about video conference solutions that itslearning integrates with. itslearning focuses really highly on LTI integrations. And what that means is we have really good integrations with things like Zoom video conference, Microsoft Teams video conference solutions, Big Blue Button video conference, and other video conference solutions that use the LTI standard. If your organization uses something that I haven't mentioned, do reach out to your key account manager. They'll be able to put you in touch with the right team to see how we can support you. Okay, I see some quite specific questions about the test tool. So I'll probably reach out to you via email because I don't want to muddle this webinar about communication. Thanks for the question. I'll reach out to you via email to make sure that we get a good response to your question. Okay, that's it for the questions. We're a little bit over the time limit here. I do appreciate everyone tuning in, and I want to say thank you for tuning in today, but also thank you for taking your job as educators so seriously and doing your best to continue to support student learning during this time. I think what you all as teachers are doing is very important, and I'm every day I'm impressed to hear that the lengths that you're going to and the care that you have for your students. So thank you for that, and again, thanks for tuning in and have a great day.